This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jackie O and you're listening to Militantly Mixed.
Yo, this is Sharmane from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
ManeHustle Media podcasts are recorded on the ancestral lands of the Chumash, Tongva, Karankawa, and Hohokam people, and I wish to pay my respects to the people of those nations, both past and present.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your Sir Auntie, Sharmane Fury, aka The Blazing Blurred, and this is episode 191. I am doing a lot better. I'm still somewhat sick, but my voice has gotten a lot better. I still have something going on with my lungs and a weak cough and things, but I'm hoping to be past this soon because I finished my medication regimen. I just want to get through this, but I do still have shortness of breath and stuff, so I'm not going to keep you too long on this intro. I do have a couple announcements, though, before we get into my guest today. Normally, I go on a hiatus in December as part of my mental health hiatuses, the 3 that I take each year, April, August, and December. But because I missed a week a while back because of my sickness, I still have this episode you're about to hear today and one other interview to share with y'all before I go on hiatus. So my next episode will be in December, first week of December, and then I will go on hiatus for the rest of the month until we come back after the new year. And as far as the continued importance of the fundraiser and all that, that is still will be a priority. My goal during the month of December, though, is to recover from my sickness. So I've been resting a lot, but it's not restful rest, it's sick rest. So I'd like to recover and get some actual rest in. And also, I have just started my downsizing process for my move out of the country in about 120 days. So a big part of the month of December will be what I'm referring to as my month of shedding. And I can kind of even extend that to 2022 being my year of shedding. A lot of things have changed for me over the last year. Things that I thought I was going to be doing, I pivoted in a different direction and have feelings about the pivot and have feelings about the change of plan for me, but I'm shedding those things that have been stressing me out or making me upset about that. I've shedded some friendships and relationships that have been in my life for a while that I've discovered were actually really toxic relationships or were no longer serving a healthy part of my life, I guess is the best way. And then literally shedding my stuff, because I am moving out of the country. I'm actively in the process of reducing the stuff that I have so that I can travel with a little bit more ease as I leave the country. So this is going to be 2022 is my year of shedding, but December is my month of shedding, getting rid of a lot of stuff to start my next chapter. And it's draining. It's like emotionally exhausting and stuff like that. There's a lot of anxiety involved in it, which I'll get into on probably a later episode or an episode after the new year, talking about the process of what's going to happen as I leave the country. Before I go, though, I know I did shout out the last Patreon sponsor that hit last week, but I'm still excited that we're getting so close to the $500 a month for Patreon sponsorship. We're still at $420 at this point. So if over the course of the next few weeks we get up to an additional $80 a month in Patreon sponsorship, we would be able to hit that $500 a month goal by the end of the year, and that would be amazing. So if you would like to sponsor the show, you can go to patreon.com/militantlymixed and sponsor the show as low as $1 a month to as high as anything you wish, and there are different reward levels depending what you choose. There is also the tip jar, which we did get a drop in the tip jar this last week, so shout out to Aaron for that. If you go to paypal.me/militantlymixed, you can do what I say, drop some coins in the tip jar. If there was an episode that touched you or you just want to support but you don't want to commit to a monthly or annual sponsorship, if you head on over to paypal.me, there's also a link to that in my link tree on Instagram. that will help support the show and in a way to keep us going. And then, of course, there's still the t-shirts, militantlymix.com/merch page. The Be Your Mix As Self t-shirt for this year is still up, and I will leave that up through the end of the year, I think. Might as well. But if you want to get that order in before Christmas or the holiday period, I think you only have another week or so so that they'll get there on time if you want to get those orders in time for the holidays. But other than that, I think I'm pretty much done. So let's get into today's episode. My guest today is Nicole. They are self-described as Asian American of Filipino and, I guess, Jamestown, Virginia, white colonizer ethnic heritage. In terms of cultural heritage, they are, mixed, but grew up in the Virginia area and predominantly around white people. So a big part of what we talk about on this episode is naming how we identify, or how fluid that process is and how difficult it is sometimes to come to a term. But once you lock in on a term, it's kind of a validating force until you jump to the next term. As I've talked about on this show all the time, our mixed race identity is very fluid, and what serves you now may not serve you a month from now, 2 years from now. And so that importance of finding those ways of self-validating and self-identifying yourself is a big part of kind of what we talked about today, in addition to the importance of finding community and believing that community is a safe space for you to be in, or that a space for you to belong in. And in this conversation, I caught myself doing something that I never thought of before, but I'm going to make an effort to change my language going forward. And that is the concept of taking up space. For the last few years, I've been using that term along with the culture in general about taking up space or not being afraid to take up space. And it occurred to me during this conversation that I don't have to take up space that I own. As a mixed person, I own access to Blackness, to Japaneseness, to even white British heritage, to Americanness, even though I don't really have a concept of that for myself. But I own those spaces because I am a member of those spaces, and yet I feel like I've had to either fight to take up space in those areas or just actively force myself to, quote, take up space in those areas, because I think I'm still believing I don't deserve full access. And I don't want to believe that way anymore, or I don't want that to be the underlying belief, while the outwardly belief is saying that I own this space, I can take up this space. So in this conversation, I'm still saying take up space, but in hearing it back and actually something that I said while we were talking, I was like, not taking it up, owning. I already own this space. I'm already a member. So I'm saying this in the intro because I'm using it as a way of holding myself accountable to actively change my language to not claim that I'm taking up space, because that implies I don't have access to it, and actually use the term owning the spaces that I come from. And I think that's going to be a difficult thing for me to transition, but it's an active thing that I want to do. So I wanted to kind of declare that in the intro so that I actively start doing that work. And that way y'all can bust me on it if you catch me saying it. You can slide into the DMs or send me an email and be like, aha, you said take up space. But yeah, I just wanted to make that declaration, and we will go ahead and get into today's episode. But before that, just know there's one more episode of Militantly Mixed before I go on hiatus that will air next week. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming our latest cousin to the Militantly Mixed family, Nicole.
My guest today is Nicole. Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and let's get into it.
Yeah, so my name is Nicole. I use they, she pronouns, and that's a lot to unpack. I
I'm there too.
I come I'm coming from Boston, Massachusetts, well, specifically Dorchester, Massachusetts. Like, I try to make that distinction as well.
I used to live in Bridgewater, but I always tell people Boston because I know nobody knows anything. That's funny.
Yeah. Because every time I say Dorchester, people are like, so where's that? I'm like, so you know where like Cambridge and Somerville are? And you're like, yeah, I know. I used to live there or something. I'm like, yeah, I'm in the opposite direction. The one that
side.
like the area no one wants to talk about because it's not pretty and white.
It's where the poor whites are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Southeast was that. I think it's kind of got a weird transplant culture now.
Are they white? Are they white gentrifying the poor white neighborhood?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah.
interesting.
Every time I like drive through there just to like pick up like food or do errands or something, I just see a new building that goes up, and it's always this like same kind of style, metallic straw looking apartment buildings. It's just like this building is made out of straw, but you painted it to look like aluminum or something.
That's funny.
I'm like, yeah, look at these people in their straw houses ready to move in. I'm so glad I left.
I know, for me, like, Boston is a no-go, like, never again, if I can avoid
I know,
it,
yeah,
never again.
I'm really trying to I'm trying so hard to resist, planting roots here in a sense, because I have such a complicated like physical relationship, I guess, with it, because it's not where I grew up. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. So I came up here for graduate school, and got a full-time job and haven't left.
Happens, yeah.
Yeah, and it's architecturally and historically a really interesting and fascinating place for me. Like that's one of the reasons why I wanted to move. Also the educational environment, for the most part, I think is really, it's more up my alley, I guess. Just the less privatized the education, the happier I feel like in that environment. But like the people,
man, it's so weird. I still say it, like, Boston, like, I live in the South now. Boston is the most racist place I've ever lived. And I've lived everywhere. Like, I'm a military kid, so we moved around a ton. But when you segregate your white people, there's no chance for the rest of us. Like, it's such a weird place. It's beautiful.
Right. I know, that's that guilt. It's like, I love being in an environment where I can look around and love everything.
Yeah, the architecture, the environment, like, so the food is good. Like, it's so beautiful. So
and then
racist. It's so racist, man.
I had in October, I had the very fortunate opportunity of going to Paris in France just for a week for like a writing type of getaway, just for myself. So great. I didn't realize just how much like tension I was holding in my body just in holding myself together in a sort of defensive, brick like solid figure, just being. I feel like living in Boston, I have learned that I need to stand firm in one place and just not move and let everyone else kind of take up space around me. There's a lot about, how I discovered how much space I take up, and how, there's this fear that I am intruding too much, or I'm encroaching too much on everyone else's space. I've felt that more so here in Boston than any other city I've been able to visit. That's like London, Paris, Philly, and New York, and Richmond. Like, I haven't seen the whole world, but in a lot of the urban spaces that I have been to outside of Boston, I felt more at home in my body.
Mm.
And
Than
it's
where you're currently living.
yeah, I mean, uh moving out of Southie was really great, and moving into Dorchester, which is a much more like varied cultural um town,
It
honestly.
butts up against like Roxbury, like the black neighborhood, the poor Irish neighborhood, the
Mhm.
slightly less poor but still middle class Irish. Like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff right there.
Yeah, and there's so many like cultural enclaves within
Mm-hmm.
Dorchester too. So like further north, you get a lot of Vietnamese restaurants, and
Yeah.
then you just keep going down this one street, and everything changed. Like all of the food, all of the kinds of outlet stores or
My
convenience
favorite little
stores
yarn shop
change.
was in Dorchester for a while.
Oh,
When I used to
it's not
knit,
there
like I
anymore.
don't knit anymore because my hands hurt. But yeah, it was one of my favorite little yarn shops. Was in Dorchester.
Yeah, and I do feel a little bit more relaxed, and you know, um, I feel like I do take up a lot more space in this area. Um, and I say that like I kind of imagine this like bubble that's around me, but not in a sense that it's a protective shield. It's just it's amorphous, I think. Yeah, like it's more of an amorphous space where it's permeable. And, I don't feel that rigidity to like close myself off to just existing. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. That's kind of like they're contradicting things where like everyone has this idea of existing as like you're here. Like that's what it should be, right? And when I think about existence, that means existing fully in a space where I can socially interact in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's not always defending myself or yeah, defending like how I look or present myself to other people.
Asking
Um,
permission to be there.
yeah, right. And I've, you know, I've felt that more openness about myself just moving a few miles down the road.
That's amazing that it can have that much of an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
But,
it's an
like,
interesting space to be in that
yeah.
area.
Oh, yeah. I had mentioned like I'd gone to Paris. That was like the first time in a very long time where I'd left Boston just because it was like Pando time. And I had just relaxed so freaking much. Like
That's amazing.
I had like not realized what it felt like to pass time on my own terms. And I'm
Oh,
like,
I
oh
love
yeah,
that.
that's because like you haven't taken a vacation in a long time.
Mm,
And yes, that's also true. But and also like existing in a space that was just to serve me,
mm.
which sounds kind of weird, but I was there to make space for myself as a writer.
I want
Well,
that sentence to be like a regular ass sentence that femmes and women and girls can say because so little space is provided for femmes and women and girls to be like, on my own terms, I'm taking up this space or I'm taking this time for myself. So I hope it gets to a point that we can say something like that without being like apologetic or even
mm.
just like, oh, I can't believe I said that. Like, or I'm being really, you know, I'm stepping out of pocket to say it. Like I love that sentence. I want that to be how people feel more often.
Yeah, like I mean, as soon as I had said it, I felt this immediate gut reaction where I'm like, oh, I need to compensate
I saw
for
it. I
what I.
saw it in your face. Yeah.
Oh no. Uh, so there's yeah, like I think I compensate more here than I had, when I was in Paris. I'm like, yeah,
Mm,
I mean, part of it's like just visiting a brand new place where you really don't know anyone, and you're like, oh,
mm-hmm.
I could do something really ridiculous, and like no one will think much about that, or
Mm-hmm.
ever, um, unless I did something like really wild. You know, I think with that anxiety that we talked about earlier, there's there's so much of it within me that I don't know what it's like to be a person that that doesn't that doesn't experience that so constantly that it's unfamiliar when you're relaxed.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's That's a real damn sentence right there. It's like for real, as a person who suffers from depression, anxiety, and just generally being, I mean, even just being a mixed person and like not looking like something that makes sense in every space that I occupy. That's a real ass sentence. One of the things we didn't mention at the top is what your heritage is.
So I am Asian American, and I've gone back and forth with terms and how to identify myself for the longest time. And I think this morning, actually, as I was like, oh no, last night I was writing notes for this talk, and I was like, Filipino. I think I remember I had put Filipino American in the survey.
Yes, you did.
But now I'm like, no, that doesn't feel quite right. I feel Asian American. And I think, I mean, there's a lot in that. Like, there's a part of me that feels like I, again, shouldn't take up too much space and claim ownership of something that's very true within me. So generalizing as much as I can and like stepping back enough to where I feel comfortable existing in a porous, permeable space where especially the Asian American term includes so many people.
Yeah.
I think that's where I feel the safest.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also like to describe us as because we're not Asians in Asia, you know, and but we're born here, Asian Americans. We have certain ties back to the home countries, but if we weren't raised there and stuff like that, our identities as, you know, me a Japanese American and you Filipino American, that you might, there's that weird detachment, like you're there and not there. So a term like Asian American, I think, does help us to that, to the extent that it includes us as part of the story, but also denotes the slight separation that we might have not being in those countries anymore, I think. Also, identity is very fluid, and, you know, right now it might feel really comfortable to be there, and it might be comfortable to be something else in a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years, you know?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
There is safety, I think, in the term. I agree with you on that one.
I mean, I feel like I'm in a place right now and have been for at least a year or so where I don't feel as compelled as I used to labeling myself and sticking with that label. And that, you know, that took years
That's
of
good.
talking to a therapist who understands being mixed race, because they're also mixed race. I think
you have a mixed therapist?
Yes,
That's awesome.
It's so rare. And like the thing is, I had for the intake call, you know, when they're like trying to figure out what it is that you want to talk about, or like what problems you have. The person who had done my intake call is my current therapist. It was just so wild that, like, you know, the first conversation that I was able to have with someone, and to be able to continue that is someone who also like deeply understands why I came to them in the first place.
Yeah, that's really great. Do they have a similar mix as you, or just a mixed person in general?
Yeah, so they're also like mixed with part Filipino, and I think that was, you know, that specificity, I guess, was really helpful, you know, because there were a lot of cultural things that I felt like at first I needed to explain, but when they identified, you know, when they self-identified to me in our introduction, and mentioned that, you know, they're part Filipino, I was like, okay, so I can talk a bit more about things and the things that I grew up with, and you also understand in a way. There's a weird like inherited language in culture
the not having to take 15 minutes to explain the context of a situation just so that you can talk about the problem.
Right. Yeah.
Is
And that's
so helpful. Yeah.
I like I'm always, not always, that sounds like I'm persistently thinking about this, but um, there's a part of me that thinks, when I'm attending therapy sessions, I'm like, how many other mixed race people have this opportunity and have this access
Right.
to like talk to someone and not feel like you have to say something with 3 types of layers in
Yeah.
order to get to that deep one. Um,
Absolutely.
I just there are times when I'm like, I wish there are more mixed therapists out there.
Yeah, I've spent most of my life in therapy as early as 12, and I've always had white therapists for the most part until this most recent therapist that I've had. And I mean, I only had one that actually like made an effort to try to understand, but it would be 45 minutes of my session explaining something from a cultural side, and then 15 minutes of 10 to 15 minutes actually being able to talk about it, and then the next week she would have done some research so that by the time we come again, she's like, okay, well, last time we talked about blah, blah, blah. And I did a little bit of research. And I'm like, yeah, but I've already moved on from that because I took so much time explaining it to you. I just dealt with my own shit. Now I got this other problem. So I got to teach you this too. So it's like me basically paying somebody else to teach them how to identify issues with mixed people and never get my shit resolved. And it was so fucking frustrating. And she was nice. Like, she was like one of the few that I really liked too. But it was so frustrating to have to go through that. Where now I have a black queer woman, a therapist. And there's times when she doesn't even have to talk. She just has to hit me with a and I'm like, oh shit, you're right. Like, like it's that cultural context stuff that like we have that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time educating each other on. And the only time I really have to educate her is on some of the Asian stuff. But it's a lot smaller of because she's already a brown person, already a marginalized person. She's getting those things a little bit quicker. Man, it's so good. But I'm glad that you have somebody that's actually has some kind of cultural crossover too, because, not having to explain something about an auntie to a white person, is like so much easier. It's just so much easier. Do you feel like you get through identifying certain things about yourself a little bit quicker because you do have a therapist that comes from a similar understanding?
Yeah, it did take, so I moved up to Boston 2018. Yeah, it took me about 2 years out of the 3 years or so that I had lived here, to where I felt really comfortable, knowing the ambiguity that that makes up who I am. And I used to be a very like hard and fast, binary oriented person, where I was like, I need to fully be Filipino, or I need to fully be white. So that's another part of my identity is like, I'm literally half and half. My mom is Filipino, and my dad's a white man from upstate New York.
Does he know what his white is?
I did like the ancestry DNA test type thing. And I found out that we're like Jamestown colonizers, basically.
Oh, wow.
So, because there's these two extremes that exist within myself. I have the, I come from a generation of, there's that inheritance of colonization on one side of that makes up a part of me. And the other side is dealing with colonization as the oppressed. I don't know the full genetic background on my mom's side, due to a lot of systemic reasons, but I know there's a part of her that is Spanish, and I wonder if there is a part of her that has that like indigenous Filipino heritage, but there's no way for me to know that.
Right.
unless, there's some really incredible scientific or anthropological discovery. And
Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of
yeah.
these Ancestry and 23andMe's is that they record so many markers for the different white ethnic groups and stuff like that that can compare it in comparison. They have such small markers for the other groups that like you just don't know. Like, I mean, on the African side, there is African Ancestry, which is a totally different company, and they have markers for the continent, so you can actually figure out what kind of African you are. But Asians don't seem to have that equivalent yet, and probably less of an interest because, like, for my Japanese grandma to find out we're partially Korean would probably really send her to
Yeah.
the whole thing. And I think I think a lot of Asia probably would feel that same way if they realized how blended Asians were. Oh my gosh, it would cause so many problems.
Well, I feel like I do completely understand. But there's also, I don't know if you've heard this already from either like past guests or just from other conversations with Filipinos, but like we're often seen as like the Latinos of Asia.
Yeah.
And there's also this, Polynesian, the Polynesian, part of that Filipino identity, they were voyagers that came to the islands. So there's already this inherent genealogy of diaspora.
Yeah.
And so I feel like in a way I'm totally okay with knowing that.
I mean, for Filipinos, it could probably be really helpful because, like, there's the African influence, there's the other parts of Asia influence, there's the Spanish colonizers, there's American imperialism. Like, there's been so many layers on top of people. Not to mention that there was hundreds of, I forget what somebody told me on the show, like 500 and something indigenous Filipino tribes that
right
potentially at some point that you're not even accounting for before people start showing up on boats, like you have no idea really how many layers of cultures that you could be coming from. I think for Filipinos, it could possibly be very freeing. I think for East Asians, it would be a struggle for them only because there's so much like, what's the word I'm looking for? Mono ethnicity is important, it seems, as part of the monocultural aspects of it. And yet you have people like China who went everywhere, and there's little countries that are ethnic Chinese, but they're different people, like Taiwan and Thailand. Like, there's so many people that are ethnic Chinese, but culturally Taiwanese or something like that because of Chinese imperialism. Like, there's so much that happens in Asia. It would be nice to kind of understand. I would love to know that we are more closely related than we think we are. It would make this a lot easier on the Asian
I know, right? At the heart of it, it's like that could solve the problems of humanity. I think on a very large scale.
Like, for me, one of the biggest reasons why I didn't identify as Asian for so long is, versus me saying I'm mixed Japanese or something, is that in attempting to enter Asian spaces as a teenager, like, Asian student organizations, whatever, was that it wasn't just that I was a mixed person, which is what I thought it was. I thought it had more to do with me being mixed. It was that I was Japanese specifically and not understanding the history of the atrocities Japan had committed across Asia, right? And so with most of these Asian organizations being predominantly Chinese, Korean, Filipino, Vietnamese, these are people that the Japanese did horrible things to, and therefore me rolling up just being like, hi, fellow Asian here, Japanese, not understanding my history, not understanding what they were raised with in terms of how they feel about Japanese people. I felt excluded. I honestly thought it was because I was mixed with Black. I didn't realize how much was also just an anti-Japanese mentality, which would make sense given the people that they're raised by, their grandparents and stuff like that. And as I got older and I would start to catch little moments of my grandmother's racism towards Koreans that I didn't really pick up on until, like, I had a crush on a half a Korean boy. And my grandma was like, absolutely not. And I was like, but he's so cute and he kicks high. He was my brother's karate instructor. Like, he kicked really high and stuff like that. And my grandma was like, absolutely not, And then she started talking about bad things about Koreans. And then one day I just remember in a conversation with somebody, I said something in passing of just like, well, you understand, like Koreans are blah, 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 blah. And then going, oh, nope, that's not mine. That's not my racism. I don't think that, like it just occurred to me that like my grandma's thing got in there in such a passive way that I just said it just absentee. But immediately, like as soon as it left my mouth, it felt wrong. And I was like, I don't think that way about Korean. Like, why did I even say that?
Why was this here? Yeah.
And then you start to think, oh shit, my grandma's been talking negatively about Koreans my whole life. And I wasn't paying attention to it, but I was internalizing it. And, once you start to deconstruct that kind of stuff and you kind of get away from it, you're like, oh, okay. So it's taken so many years for me to be able to even identify as Asian American. And now I find a comfort in the term that I didn't used to find before. But that's because I've done more research now. I understand a little bit more about what Japan did across Asia and how, like, my literal ancestors would be a part of that. And so needing to understand that complication of being colonizer and colonized. I mean, I'm British, like literal British, like my grandma's from England. I'm Japanese. My grandma's from Japan. I'm literally made of people who have committed atrocities around the world. And then I'm also Black. Who was impacted by all of that. And that allowing for fluidity, allowing for training to like learn this type of stuff, I think becomes a lot more helpful when it comes to when you like redefine your own identity. You mentioned like being very much living in the binary for a period of time because you were viewing yourself as like literally half white and half Filipino. Was it at all? Well, I guess you said Jamestown. So, I mean, that's already probably pretty jarring to find out, like, not only is that your white histories, you didn't just come here, like, they came here to colonize.
I mean, there was a moment actually of pride. And I think that's largely because, I grew up in a predominantly white environment. My school district was very white, and we learned about Jamestown because in proximity, you're in Virginia.
You're from Virginia,
you're gonna learn about Jamestown. And I was like, oh, cool! Like that's pretty sick. I could go down there and see my dead ancestors.
Like you're more American than some people who are walking around being like, you're not American,
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I didn't even register it, and I thought it was like it felt a bit more like celebrity. Like I was like, oh, I'm related to this like group of people that everyone continues to talk about.
No, that makes sense too. Yeah.
And then I guess with the binary sense, I didn't really start to question things until I questioned my gender, and I think that was the catalyst for understanding fluidity within myself. So, like because I had grown up in a predominantly white area, I internalized that. I didn't really question that part of myself, and and I didn't think about race and how that affected me in a sense of how other people are perceiving me or on paperwork until.
Did people not make you feel like an other very often growing up, even though you were in a
No, not in
environment?
not in a negative sense. I do remember, people in like my middle school, high school theater groups. They were the closest people that I had to like friends, and conversing with people on a regular basis about things that's not just about homework.
Yeah.
And I do remember some of the people that were closest to me were like, oh, look, it's the Asian persuasion. And that was the
Oh, God.
And I was like, okay, cool. Like that's a nickname. I'm part of a friend group. And but I was like one of the only Asians in a sense. Like there were two other people I think in my grade who were Asian American, and were more visibly presenting as Asian American, like more like Eastern Asian.
Have you been treated, or do you view yourself as more ambiguous in your presentation?
Oh yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like I look like a white person just because of so
You
much,
do.
like,
This always baffles me. Like literally 4 years in, this continues to baffle me about Asian white mixes who are in sort of an ambiguity in your presentation. You all view yourself as looking more white,
are
and
you
I
serious?
do not view you that way. Like it is so bizarre how much similarity there is across white Asians in
I
America.
mean, I see. The thing is, I've never met another white Asian, so like,
Are you serious? You've never?
yeah, no, like a lot of the mixed race folks that I've met are, they're more brown, and there's
Okay.
so much more to their like mixed background. Like they have,
Like me, like a black
several
white
different,
Asian.
yeah, like 3 or 4 different races,
Mm.
and um, you know, there's a lot of acceptance and ambiguity within a lot of those people that I've
Yeah.
talked to and met. But yeah, I've never met someone who is as strictly binary.
Gosh, I know so many of you, and it's not just because of the show. Like, literally, I think it's because of being a military kid, which is why I
Okay.
always do make that jump. You know, I said earlier, like, I always make the mistake of assuming mixed white Asians are because of the military. And it's because I grew up around y'all. You know, like, as a military kid, all of us were pretty mixed and stuff. But of the Asians, they were always white, almost always white. I knew only
Huh.
a few black Asians like myself. And in my case, like both of my parents are mixed. So like my mom's Japanese and Appalachian white and West Virginian Appalachian. And my dad is black and white British. And so like my mom is like you, right? Like a half white, half Asian person. And I view her like I see a kind of white person with Asian eyes with my mom, and her sisters look like a different kind of white Asian too. But like outside of my own family, all the mixed white Asians that I meet on the show or otherwise end up saying, because I look white, so blah blah blah, and I'm going over here like, "Hello, Asian person, what are you talking about? Like,
Oh
why
my
do you
god.
think you look white?" It's so funny. Gosh, this is something I need to tackle. I need to tackle this so much because it comes up so often. Like, what is going on with my eyes that I always see? Like, oh yeah, they're probably mixed white, but that's an Asian person versus your own body looking at your own face in the mirror, seeing a mostly white person. Because
Hmm.
you've got the dark hair. Like, I mean, I would honestly think you were more of a mixed East Asian and white person than necessarily a Filipino because you are pretty fair. But you still look hella Asian to me, dude.
Well, like, I mean, so my partner is a cis white man, and I think one of the questions that I had asked him, like towards the beginning of our relationship, was like, "How Asian do I look to you?"
I mean, it's probably an important question.
Like, I kind of want to know in the sense of like a fetish, but also,
Sure, yeah.
like I'm having an identity crisis, and you're going to share this experience with me. uh, but he's like, "No, you don't look white." And I'm like, "Okay, I don't believe you because you're also." But, I don't know. Like,
Okay, so
I
how
want
white
people to
does
tell
he
me,
look?
"Oh, he's like straight up white."
Like blonde hair,
Like,
blue-eyed Nazi poster
oh
child,
no,
or
not in that sense.
okay? What are we talking?
No, brown hair, blue eyes,
Okay.
really pale skin. And, you know, it's just so weird because I want validation from white people that I don't look white, but I also
Interesting.
don't believe them at the same time,
That is
And
interesting.
also, like, there's another part of me that's like, why am I depending so much on a white person to tell me what I look like? And so then I tried to figure, I, I, I completely flipped. So I was like, what if I, talk to more Asian American people and ask them what I look like? And that started this whole journey really of me finding an Asian American community that I felt
Mm,
comfortable being in.
mm,
And because prior to that, it was always like the Filipino group outside of church, and I didn't really get along with any of the kids that were there because
mm,
both of these children's parents were
okay.
all Filipino. And
Huh.
um, so I always felt like on the outside of that group growing up. Um, and
Were most of your friends like friends of choice? Were they mostly white then, growing
yeah,
up?
yeah.
Mm,
And that's because like
that's who was around.
that was the demographic, yeah,
Yeah.
of the area that I was in. And so with like finding an Asian American community, I didn't really see myself needing that community until after I graduated from college
Mm,
and realized that a lot of the people from my undergraduate program were very white, and I was also coming into a phase of my life where I wanted to learn so much more about my family, and in the sense of the history of
yeah.
what makes me who I am.
Mm.
And I don't know like what it is about the 20s, but being in your 20s makes you want to question like everything and everyone that's come before you.
Well, I
And
think that has a lot to do with like people literally make you feel like by your 20s you're supposed to have it all
oh
ironed
yeah,
out.
okay.
Like you're supposed to know who you are. When like you're baby adults, you're not real adults yet, right? Like you haven't been out in the world long enough, and a lot of that early part of your 20s you're in school anyway, so you're like half
Mhm.
in, half out of your adulthood. How do you have time to figure out who you are while you're also trying to learn what you're gonna be? Like what you're gonna do for a living.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
too tough. I think it's not until your 30s that you really start to settle, I think, into your identity a little harder. But that is such a weird time. You're like,
Mm.
who the fuck am I? Am I
Yeah.
my ancestry? Am I my culture? Am I the place I grew up? Am I this job that I've chosen I'm going to be in? Like there's so much.
Mm.
And then forget about like once you start like actually accessing your gender. For those of us in a similar boat, like for me, I describe myself as having a bigender identity because the the binary is very important to the way I identify. I identify very masculine and feminine, just femme-bodied. Whereas a lot of my non-binary friends, they don't feel, they literally feel non-binary. They don't feel masculine or feminine. They're just something different
Mm.
from me. And then there's the people that are just like, I don't know, I don't think I got anything going on. Like I have a couple agender friends too that feel like they don't have anything going on. You're doing that, and you're trying to figure out your mixed shit, and you're trying to figure out who you're gonna be as when you grow up. Like quotation figures when you grow up. Are you kidding me? Like no, your 20s. You just got. That's the time to do it. That's not the time to That's not the time to know
Mhm.
it. That's the time to figure it out. Like to be
Mhm.
trying things on, like different coats and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like I don't think I started like absorbing, you know, art that was by Asian American artists or by, writers of color or artists of color, really, until,
Mm.
after college. And I think it was, God damn, I hate that I have to say that this guy was the person that helped me realize that. It was Juno Diaz's writing. And I mean, I say that now knowing that he's a problematic person, but I
I see.
also understand that his writing at the time really helped me get out of this, kind of back and forth spiral of settling on one thing about myself.
Mm.
And I don't know if you've ever heard this or experienced it, but it's like someone gives you that one text by a person of color, and it's like the key to
You're like
this
a whole
gate.
new world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the heavenly angels are singing, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is. I didn't know how much I needed writing by people that didn't look um like a white person.
It's like
Yeah.
uncomfortable at first because you start to think like, why didn't I already know to look for this
Right.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
and
weird moment.
it does, I think, start with how we are like what we are taught, like what we are taught to read and to talk about. Uh, and in my particular neighborhood and school, that whole demographic was very white. So, people who don't look outside of that lens, you're not gonna, teach your children,
Yeah.
about different perspectives just because you see what's around you and it's very homogenous. And that was kind of baked into my education growing up. And now I'm just like complete 180 where I'm like, because I didn't have that stuff growing up. I didn't have that access. I didn't have that one person to, pass something down to me, really.
Mhm.
Um, it's, it, I want to pass that down,
Did
like I want to
you
pay it forward. So
did you not talk about the fact that your parents were from different cultures or countries even growing up?
we did that. Yeah. See, the thing is, I look back and like we did all of those things where we had conversations. I did ask them questions about like, what am I supposed to circle on this demographic form?
It's a big question for
But
all of us.
but the thing is, like, I don't think it felt very surface level. Like we were talking about it. I'm like, okay, I know what answer, or I know how to answer when somebody asks me a question about this. But it didn't sink any further
Didn't
into,
really understand.
yeah.
Hmm.
And I mean, I still think to this day, I'm like, why do I feel this way about uh, learning about this growing up? And I have no idea.
Is it still kind of itchy, I guess, like to
It's,
make those
yeah, there's like
efforts?
I mean, there's a moment I'm like, I'll take a step back every so often and think like, you know, how did that happen? We did all of the things. It's like I thought we, uh, actually like had these conversations, but they didn't amount to the kind of reckoning reckoning that I was
Yeah.
looking for or was expecting, I guess.
So with you sort of growing up mostly around white folks, but you did at least address some aspects of being multicultural at least growing up. And then you find yourself seeking more racial identifiable race validation from white people. Are there moments that you have from, say, a non-related Filipino that accidentally validates you, and you're just like, "Oh shit, I'm
Like validate me as mixed
as a
race.
Filipino,"
Oh, okay.
or as a mixed Filipino either.
For the longest time I didn't perceive that. If someone did, I didn't pick up on it. So I think I guess a simple answer to your question is no. Um, but I think when I became more involved in like diasporic Asian American communities and um, something groups that are more openly identified as Asian American, like
Mm-hmm.
uh, the more variety of people there were in those communities, the more I felt like I was seen. Like I remember this is like this really incredible community called Kundiman for like Asian American writers. And for the longest time, I had put off applying to them because I was like, I'm white. I'm not a person of color. I can't do that. That's
Mm.
invading someone else's space.
Mm.
And uh, I eventually had gotten to a point in my like creative writing graduate program where I felt really starved of the kinds of feedback that I was looking for that was not just about craft, but about these other themes that I was trying to write through that were actually about my racial
Mm-hmm.
identity.
Mm.
Um, and like no one was addressing that in my work. And I wanted to be around people who could see that. Um, and the only way, you know, I've asked other writers of color at like book talks and stuff, like, what do you do when you're in this situation? They're like, I went to Kundiman.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
I was like, this is me. um, and it's this really great writing retreat program and collective, really, that you know gets people connected in the Asian American community. And when I went to this retreat, I was so worried about how people would judge me or look at me a certain way or be like, this person shouldn't be here. Why? How did they get in? It's like I
You were worried about that going in to the
yes,
space.
and
Okay.
like every day, like leading up to this retreat, and then the day of, like even a few days into it, just being like, I shouldn't be in this group. I'm going to sit by the wall. It is fine.
You were feeling like very white is the problem you were having there?
Yeah, and
But your
the thing is,
face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But like seriously, that like I feel this way so often when I talk to mixed people. It's just like, but your face. Like I'm seeing a brown person. I don't understand. I'm seeing an Asian. I know that you're mixed, but I'm like, yeah. I'm sorry. I apologize.
well, yeah. But the thing is, like, I'm so wrapped up in this perception of myself
Yeah.
that I don't give myself room to listen to other people, like when they're actually being honest and coming from a sincere place.
Like literally,
Like,
that's like the whole mission. Like I didn't even know that was going to be the mission of the show, but everybody I talked to in the beginning, that lack of validate, like that lack of internal validation, was so loud that you couldn't hear a person do something like what I just did. Like, but your face is like. It just became a thing of like, okay, part of the mission of the show is not just to share these stories, but to literally like smack people in the face with like, you are obviously a mixed person. You belong in all of these categories that you come from. Just like take up space. Like I want you to take up that space so bad. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like I hear it and I'm just like, I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that I'm still having that same conversation with people where I'm just like, I need you to just know that you exist in those spaces. You belong in those spaces. I'm sorry. Keep going. I'm sorry.
well, that's the thing. Like, taking that risk, what I saw as a risk,
Sure, yeah.
and immersing myself in a community like this Asian American Writers Retreat. I learned that how I learned that there were very different ways of being perceived by others, and it's not just like the worst case scenario that I picture in my head. And I was, approached by people who just talked to me like, I was a person and not like immediately questioning.
What are you doing here?
Right. Yeah. Like that was my first concern. Like everyone is going to approach me and say, what are you doing here?
Oh, and that was a
But
real fear. Like your anxiety was telling you that was what people were thinking while they were talking to
right.
you.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, that's still that feeling within me. It still happens sometimes, but it's, I think ever since I attended that retreat and just felt like I could exist in a space where I didn't have to justify, being in a place where I felt like I belonged.
Well, I'm so glad that you got to have that space. It like rips me to shreds to think that you're sitting there with that kind of anxiety, even as you're trying to participate in a space like that. Like I'm sure a bunch of people feel that way. It just rips me to shreds to think that you would have that feeling. But I'm so glad that you did get to feel like you could take that space, or that you weren't taking it, that you belonged.
Right, right. And the thing is, I have that like double speak when I'm looking back at this experience where I'm like, I mean, immediately after this retreat, I was like, this is the best I've ever felt about myself and myself as a creator and as a human. But, there's this sense of doubt that, comes back and looks back at those memories and I guess like questioning the validity of that experience.
Oh, you're killing me.
I'm like, just stop
You're just
being
gonna have to text me every time you feel that way, and I'll be like, "Shut up, your face,"
It's. I mean, I keep trying to get to this point where, in this conversation, where majority of the time, this is all just like all of this stuff is happening in my head, and I am sitting there wasting time thinking about that. But there's always someone from the outside who brings me out of that a very isolating space,
Yeah.
and it was very accepting. Like everyone at that retreat was so accepting. And I'm like, this is incredible. Like I
Yeah.
didn't know everyone could be nice
Oh no.
about existing in a space and not having to, justify how you got here. Uh, it's it's very refreshing, and I think so much so that I'm like, nah, that can't have happened. That didn't happen, right?
I get it. I definitely do. It's not like I don't also experience like those feelings of invalidation or I don't belong here. I still do. I'm way better at telling people not to feel that way than I am, of course, sometimes feeling that way. I mean, but sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes it does. I'm better at it now because I have a lot more practice now, especially doing a show like this. Me constantly telling other people to like take up that space or feel like you belong, eventually that kind of seeps in and I have to start taking my own advice, right? So like in your case, as you have these moments of like, I felt super validated in this space. Oh, that couldn't have happened that way. I must have been misinterpreting. Like if you can hear the person telling you that you belong as yourself, I feel like that would be like far more valuable than some outsider telling you that you belong in a space, right? Like I think we seek out external validation, and I do it too. We seek out external validation so much because we don't trust ourselves to think we know, or that we're not just trying to fool ourselves for comfort. But I think like there's so much more power in being able to get yourself to a place where you don't need the external validation. For me, like I said, I have a lot of practice at it now because I do a show where I'm literally talking about this all the time. There is still a moment, and it's the smallest shit too. Like the other day, I was coming back home from a flight, and the bus driver for the shuttle bus kept calling me little sis, which is something that Black people call, and I knew he wasn't telling because he didn't call anybody else that came on the bus little sis. He called them miss, ma'am, this, that, but he called me little sis the whole time. And it was just a small way of like saying, I see you. And it was very nice. And I love that. And I wrote, like I said, I ride that wave all day long. That being said, I don't have to rely solely on that external validation anymore. When there was a period of time, I needed it all the time. And I feel like a lot of my listeners, a lot of my guests probably are probably, by the time they come to this show, they're probably still in that place. And I don't know how else to tell people to start hearing it in their own voice, except for to just like be like, this is what I saw. I don't know what you see, but this is what I saw. And hopefully you eventually will like take that in and hear it yourself, because that's what I want for us. I want us to feel comfortable in our skin, because I think like the world teaches us like we're half, right? Well, you literally said it about yourself. I'm half this, I'm half that. But like, think about a monoracial person. They don't think of themselves as half their mom and half their dad, right? Even if their parents look the same race, right? They're not like, I'm half my mom, I half my dad. They're like, we're a family. I think in our case, because in some cases it's very obvious, like there's a brown and there's a white, or there's a brown and there's a darker brown, or something like that for the mixed folks. That's why we think of ourselves in those half terms. But for me, I started telling myself I'm not less than, I'm more. I literally have more things than monoracial people have. Don't we covet more? Like, there's no people like more usually. So why am I thinking I'm less of a person, even though I'm more things than they are? And so, like, it's just changing. For me, it's just changing that internal talk in these little tiny ways. And over a couple months, a couple years, you just start to, that's the voice you end up using after that. And so, like, if someone tried to convince me that less is more now, right? How boring your life must be. You're just one thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
what I kind of
it's like trying to answer the question, like, oh, so what are your hobbies? And it's like, shit, I don't know.
Yeah,
like how do I answer that question? I actually am in the space where I'm like, what does that mean to me? Because I feel like so tethered to the work that I do for, to pay the bill, like the work that pays me. But there's also that part of myself that is like, I won't feel fulfilled at the end of the day until I write something or until I read something
Yeah.
that's outside of the work that I do.
And to me, that feels like the realer part of you than anything, right? Like, you're not going to be comfortable going to sleep if you don't do this thing that you decide on. That's you right there.
Yeah. And it's just like the allowing myself to look at that and be like, it's a necessary part of you in order to get up the next day.
Yeah.
And there's also a part of me that's like, that's a lower tier thing. You don't need to do that in order to get by. You can still go to sleep and wake up tomorrow and continue to exist. But there's a
it's really
like
telling that we do that to ourselves, right? That we we're so programmed by like this capitalist society that we're just like, no, you need to go to bed so you go to work tomorrow so you can pay the bills.
Right.
Where it's like, I have this thought, this scene, this chapter, this poem, this whatever to get out. I needed to get out. And the missed opportunity that you would have if you don't get that out. I think that would chip away at you. Like it would just start to chip away at you.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel that since like really deeply right now, because I'm at a point, in my like trying to navigate my work life balance where it's like, do I even need to have a life? Sounds so weird.
No, I get what you're saying though, because that's like we've literally been programmed to be like that, right?
Yeah, and so much of my job is taking up more and more of my time in the day. And now that, we're a couple of years into remote work at my job, and that's something that no one at this organization has never done before, to this extent. Everyone is, siloed doing their own things at home, and I've begun to really like dissociate from so much of what I do in a day that, by coming to this conversation, I'm like, I have no personality. I don't know what to talk about. All I need to do is talk about work, and that's how the time passes by. And I'm like, shit, man. Like, what have I done to myself?
No, it's not uncommon though. I'll tell you, like most people do kind of feel that way when they come to the show. They're just like, they're compelled, they want to do it, but they're just like, I mean, I hear the same things over and over again. I hear like, I'm not that interesting. My story's not as interesting as other people. Or I really just want to talk to you. And so that's why I came on, because I think you're interesting. Or like, this is probably going to be a really short episode because I'm pretty boring. Like literally, it's all like the same. It's a theme. And I've been doing this like 200 plus interviews at this point, and like a lot of people say the same things about themselves. They have to put themselves lower or set a lower expectation for me, I think, because I don't know, like we're just trained. This is the way our society is. Like, you're less, the other person is more. I'm not fancy. I'm just a regular ass person who was compelled to press record in the same way that like what you do. You were compelled to write. Other people are compelled to do things. I just decided to focus on one topic so that like people got used to me as a personality. But like, I'm struggling with the same shit that everybody else is struggling with. But people come to me and they're just like, I'm super boring. I just want to talk to you. So let's go ahead and do this. I'll embarrass myself on your podcast so that like I have a chance to talk to you. It's the same shit. Like everybody feels the same thing. And I just like, if anything, doing this show has been a huge confidence booster for me, because it's just been like, I have the same feelings that all these people who come and talk to me feel. And they're looking to me like I somehow know some shit. I ain't no shit. I don't. I'm just having a very similar conversation multiple times. And so I'm just a little bit more skilled at it at this point than I was 4 years ago. And 4 years from now, I'll be even better. Or at least I hope so. But, like I said, well, even that, I compelled to put myself down for a minute. I was like, I'll be better I might not be better, but I'm
Who
gonna
knows?
do it. You know, like we're just compelled to do it, and it's just like I hope for us that we get out of that, and especially as mixed people and as brown people, that we move through life with the same unearned confidence that a mediocre white person is like. You know, like they walk through the life. Like I want that for us. I want us to be able to be mediocre and successful at the same time.
Oh,
But
what a dream.
but with all this like kind of back and forth about like, you know, getting to the place of getting more comfortable with different terms for yourself and stuff like that, do you have something that you feel like you love most about being mixed?
Um, I'm going to use that term that a lot of mixed race people and people of color are probably tired of now, and that's I have an intersectional perspective.
I mean, you
And
do though, so it's like
I'm like, well, I'm really sorry to use this term, but there are so many points of view that I have learned that I hold within myself,
mhm,
and that, you know, having that intersectional relationship with gender and with race and culture, um, and you know, other things like my socioeconomic status, whether you know, um, I am a manual laborer or a white collar worker or something, like, you know,
mhm,
there's so many different ways I can view the world with different lenses all at the same time and see something different each time and be okay with that.
mhm, mhm.
I think that's a really great thing about being mixed is that I have learned so much more about people just by embodying the very like approach to um, multiple ways of seeing. I don't know if
Yeah,
that makes any sense,
no,
but
it does. It does.
like I wish this was a profound moment, but like, you know, being in a writing community, like all back in grad school, there's, you know, writing workshops, and the kinds of feedback that I appreciated the most were the ones that, you know, tackle two different things within the same question. And that's kind of how I look at, you know, how I communicate and how I understand people. Like, it's not just one side of the story that you're absorbing when you perceive someone else. There's so much more to them. Um, and instead of just trying to find out this like one thing that completely identifies someone, I am actually like really like I'm curious. I have ended up being more curious as a mixed person. Um, you know, I'm more open-minded than I thought I could ever be.
Mm,
Like I just always want to ask questions because I know that I will never have all of the answers, and I'm just going to continue to keep asking questions. I don't know.
no, that's good. I like it. I
The way
mean,
I think about things is with all of these paths that open up, they're never going to, you know, uh, lead me to the only answer.
yeah. And how boring would it be if we all had one path?
Right. Yeah.
You know, like you said, together. You know what I'm saying? Well, thank you for
I just,
joining me for this conversation. I appreciate it. I know sometimes it's weird to like get into this podcast thing and not know the direction it's going to go, but I had a really fun time talking to you, and also thank you for like dealing with my weird cartoon sick voice too.
I mean, I don't hear a cartoon, and I mean, that's just my perspective.
It's so strange.
But yeah, no, it's been really, really wonderful to, you know, communicate with someone. And I say that like not talking at you about my experience, but also
Mm.
like hearing about someone else going through the same things, or, you know, going through, you know, different things, but experiencing the same outcome. It's,
Yeah.
um, you know, I keep thinking like I'll not really get the chance to interact with other mixed people because there's just not many of us. When it's like, I don't know what there actually are a lot
They're all
of
over.
mixed.
I can point you in the direction of some.
It's just like, how come I can't find them?
Yeah. You gotta start a podcast, and you just like, it's a trick. It's like
they'll come to
no, they'll come to you.
Militantly Mixed is a Maine Hustle Media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed-ass self. Maine Hustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.